you, Deputy Clare Daly.
Thanks very much, Ceann Comhairle. I have to say I was very surprised when I heard Deputy Healy-Rae saying that no dog owner would want to hurt a hair on the of a dog's head, but of course I then realised that he was talking about a H-A-I-R and not a H-A-R-E, because obviously hares unfortunately are injured on a regular basis because of the activity of some dog owners and the barbaric practice which continues of hare coursing in this state. And it's not a debate about rural versus urban, because actually increasingly now many farmers and landowners are objecting to these mobs coming onto their land, either trying to gather hares or engage in any of that type of activity. And for me, there's a certain irony in us discussing this bill here tonight when myself and Deputy O'Sullivan came from a court case in Carlow this morning, which was unfortunately adjourned, the Kavanagh case, where they've pleaded guilty to 120 counts of appalling animal cruelty in relation to the issues of puppy farming. So there are huge issues around animal welfare in this state which need to be addressed. This bill today before us is really just another attempt to update the legislation in terms of regulating the greyhound industry. We know there have been numerous attempts to clean it up over the years. We had the Act in 1993, two more in 2007, the 2011 Welfare of Greyhounds Act, the 2013 Animal Health and Welfare Bill. I think we have to state as well that there have been obviously 3 reports into the industry in the last 5 years: the Indicon report, the 2015 report on the greyhound industry, and the Morris Review of Anti-Doping and Medication in Ireland, all of which really serves to highlight how defective the so-called industry is and how desperately in need of robust legislation it is. And it is a misnomer to talk about rogue operators, as Deputy Healy-Rae did, flies in the face of the evidence of all of those reports that have been done over the past number of years. So regulation is urgently needed, and while I would certainly welcome that the government are bringing forward the bill, I have to say that it is still not enough. Some aspects of it are to be welcomed, of course, but there is much that has not been addressed, and we would be failing in our responsibility if we didn't concentrate our remarks at this stage in regard to those issues. The bill itself is weighted towards administrative powers like the make-up of the board membership and its expertise. And the legislation, I suppose, as presented, really seems to be a bit more about marketing rather than the welfare of greyhounds, without which obviously you don't have an industry. And I have to say I object to the term industry when we're talking about the welfare of animals. And I think it gives you an insight into the thinking behind the bill, that it had to take an amendment from Senator Lynn Rowan in the Seanad, which thankfully was included, but to get a vet put on the board. You would have thought now, if this bill was supposed to be dealing with animal and dog welfare, a vet would have been put on without somebody in here having to put in an amendment to that regard. So I think this gives us an indication of the thinking, because issues around governance, animal welfare and the export of dogs, which have been left out of the bill entirely, all need to have a legislative framework which has not been provided in the current bill. And I don't know how much we will be able to amend it at committee stage, but it does need considerable work, because we have to be honest about it. This is an industry which has been surrounded by scandal, illegality, doping and animal cruelty. There's no question, it's established fact that thousands of dogs are surrendered or abandoned to pounds every year. Hundreds of them are put down as a result of injuries received at racetracks, injuries like fractures, spinal injury, ligaments, muscle damage, head trauma and all the rest of it. On top of this, we've obviously also had the very high-profile incidents of doping with cocaine and other products that can be bought over the internet. Absolutely shocking, and bringing this state into massive disrepute internationally. And in that context, I have to say I am very disappointed in terms of the governance proposals in the bill as it stands at the moment. And as far as I'm concerned, they really don't go far enough, because to suggest, as the bill does, that it's enough to hand over the administrative powers of sanction to a board that has no real powers of enforcement really indicates how seriously the issue of regulation has been taken, which I would say is, to be honest with you, not very serious at all. It's quite akin to lip service, really, because there's no attempt to enhance enforcement, to introduce criminal sanctions of a serious character. Really what the bill is proposing to do is to put forward some form of self-policing. And we all know where self-policing gets us. Self-regulation really is no regulation, and this state has learned nothing if we don't provide for outside oversight and scrutiny. We know that many of the animal welfare organisations have highlighted some of these points in previous discussions on this bill. The ISPCA have questioned the limited powers of sanction and have highlighted that it does need to be altered in order to provide for serious deterrence. They point out as well that the stewards of the IGB are not authorised under the Animal Welfare Act to investigate possession of illegal substances, an issue which is featured prominently, obviously, in the industry, and which is an evolving issue, which, you know, again, let's be honest about it, people are very creatively finding ways around doping in order to have it continue under different guises, all at the expense of the dogs. The Irish Council Against Blood Sports has stated that the current sampling strategy as it's put in place is far too routine, and it has serious concerns about the ability of the Irish Greyhound Board to keep up with the rapid pace of doping in the industry. Again, as I say, a national scandal, apart from the reputational damage, apart from the appalling conduct of that. There is a serious welfare issue at the heart of that. You know, I think we have to say that the welfare of greyhounds and the deployment of funds in respect of welfare-related issues was identified as a key issue at the committee pre-leg scrutiny, but it hasn't been addressed in the bill. Why is that? Like, is the Minister going to address that point? This whole aspect of the bill has to be substantially strengthened, and I'd really like to know why it didn't find its way into the latter stages. You know, we have to say the greyhound racing industry relies on a massive subsidy by the taxpayers of this state, a subsidy which has risen rapidly and steadily for the period 2010 to 2016, correlating with the surrender of 2,896 greyhounds to dog pounds, with 2,497 of those dogs being put down during that time. You know, no increase in funds from the industry, mind you, in that same period in order to provide for retired greyhounds. Why is that? The organisations at the coalface, ICABS, the ISPCA, Dogs Trust, the Greyhound Association, have all highlighted the need for the industry to increase its contribution to animal welfare. Funds are clearly badly needed here, funds to cover the cost of additional inspectors, to ensure that welfare issues, medical treatment, the rehoming of retired greyhounds, that all of these issues are addressed. It's interesting that the British Retired Greyhound Trust receives substantially more funding each year from the industry in Britain, for example. So why are we so far behind, and why haven't we adopted that practice if we're serious about assisting? The Greyhound Rescue Association of Ireland has reported that during the period of 2014 to 2015, they saw a decline in the number of dogs being destroyed. That corresponded with a rise in greyhounds being transferred to welfare groups. So in other words, the volunteer-based rescue and animal welfare groups like Dogs Trust and HUGS, the Homes for Unwanted Greyhounds, intervened and stepped in to provide the protection and welfare needed, and indeed to home greyhounds abandoned by the greyhound racing industry, who are not paying their way and yet are the source of the problem. And the Minister will be aware that the ISPCA, for example, have called for an additional 500,000 per year just to hire additional inspectors, but frankly, as far as I'm concerned, they need to be made to cough up substantially more than that in order to address the welfare of retired greyhounds. We need to take note as well of the figures regarding the greyhounds being killed in pounds, which only represents a small portion of the amount that fall victim to this industry. And as I said previously, thousands of greyhounds suffering injuries at racetracks almost every year and are destroyed by track vets. And shamefully, of course, there are, as my colleagues referred to earlier, the greyhounds that go missing, presumed killed. We know that one, despite the remarks made about every dog owner being a dog lover, and I know many of them are, however, not all, and the cruelty and the bad practice is undisputed. But one Irish trainer remarked online, "I've seen dogs being shot. It has to be done as there's too many of them to rehome." Another former chairman of the Irish Greyhound Board admitted on radio in 2016 that he believed it was absolutely okay for thousands of dogs to be killed and that racing couldn't exist without the destruction of dogs. And again, as I say, this is an industry being given state funds that's responsible for catastrophic injury and death of greyhounds and abandonment and given over to the hands and the hard-pressed shoulders of overstretched volunteers. And, you know, I'm pointing this out because I do think some of the language is misleading and not really believable. Minister Creed, in a response to a question from Maureen O'Sullivan last year, stated that Bord na Gáin's strategic plan is to put animal welfare at the centre of the industry. Let's be honest about this. Profit is at the centre of the industry, not animal welfare. Animal welfare is only involved if it jeopardises the asset, if it's going to be worth it. And that doesn't always tally. It's done in a very narrow perimeter, really. And the language, I think, really portrays that we're not serious because we're not putting in the supports in terms of welfare. The other key issue not included in the bill, which is very concerning, is the issue of the export of Irish greyhounds. And I know my colleague Deputy Bruin has tabled a private member's bill on this and addressed some of these points earlier in the chamber. But you do have to answer, could it not have been accommodated in this bill? Why isn't the issues that he was looking for included here? You know, and everybody knows, that this is a hugely controversial issue because of our appalling record in facilitating exports to China and other countries that have little or no regulations to protect the welfare of dogs. We know the very high-profile cases in the media, some of whom have been cited earlier, treatment of dogs in places like Macau, where there are no regulations at all to protect dogs during their careers. They live the majority of their lives in cages, and they'll face certain death at the end of it, boiled, skinned and sold off for food, which is frankly horrific as far as I'm concerned, although I do see a contradiction in the remarks of some people who would find it abhorrent to eat a dog but have no problem in eating a cow or a sheep or a pig or whatever either. But that's probably not a debate for today, but it is linked as far as I'm concerned. We've also seen the embarrassing situation whereby animal welfare volunteers in the UK had to stop the export of Irish greyhounds through their airports in 2017, and some airlines have since taken a principled stand on the matter and refused to transport greyhounds to countries that don't meet animal welfare standards. Australia, for example, we know refuses to export greyhounds to China, and as far as I'm concerned, this should be a fundamental part of the legislation, and the government's refusal to do it is of itself a reflection, as far as I'm concerned, that we don't sufficiently attend to these issues. I note the Minister's response to this proposal suggests that such restrictions may not be compatible with EU trade law, but frankly I just see that as a deflection, and as we have had really contradictory responses on this over the years. The previous Minister is on record as saying once appropriate health and welfare certification requirements are met, the dogs, including greyhounds, may be exported internationally, including to China. The certification, however, refers only to transport conditions. It doesn't deal with the conditions the dogs will face in the jurisdiction they're being transported to, or to the welfare standards in the state. However, in March last year, the Department blocked the Irish Greyhound Board from exporting dogs to China over animal welfare concerns, stating that considers the risk contained in this proposal for Bord na Gán in terms of its reputation from a range of different perspectives are unacceptably high. So the Department is more concerned about reputational damage than the damage being done to dogs. So, as it was pointed out in the Seanad debate, we can also call for a derogation under Article 36 that expressly provides for exceptions based on public morality and the protection of health and life of humans, animals or plants. So I think there's a lot more work to be done on this, and you know, I think we can deal with these points at committee stage. As I said, I welcome that the bill is here, but not good enough. A lot more to be done.